I am William Jamar Wright.
And I'm Hattie.
And this is our podcast, HattieJo. And
what are we doing?
Yeah, what are we doing? Well, this month we're actually going to discuss toxic relationships. This actually came up. Yeah, well, it's the month of February, so Valentine's Day.
Didn't we
matters of the heart.
Yeah, didn't we have last year in February, like breakups or something?
Yes, last year for the month of February, the topic I think was like being either dumping somebody or breaking somebody's heart. Yes,
heartbreak, and we had the heartbreak hotel. Yeah.
So this year, well, it kind of like some stories, like throughout the country. Just kind of brought the idea of toxic relationships.
Okay.
And the story that is about this college student. He was a student athlete, and he was, I don't know the full story, but I can pretty safely say that they were not in a great relationship.
He and his partner?
Yeah, he and his partner were not in a great relationship. And it actually, their situation actually ended in that, the partner posted a video of the two of them in an argument fight. And as a result of that, he actually is no longer a student athlete at that university.
Oh, I think you told me about this, and she posted it thinking it would make him get back with her.
Yeah, and she later after the post went viral and the young man was off the team, came back. She posted some comments saying that I was hoping that I was not hoping for anything bad to happen to him, and that I was hoping that this would in turn come back to us getting back together. And I just started to think about there were probably so many times where people around them or their friends tried to tell them that this relationship is not good.
Right. This ain't it, Joe.
Yeah, this ain't it. And then I started to think about not only for myself, the toxic relationships I've been in, and it hasn't been that many. It's probably been one or two toxic relationships, and the toxic relationships I've seen my friends in, and I think in a lot of ways, I am not the biggest proponent of friends stepping into their friends' relationships.
Mm-hmm.
But I've just come to I think I've come to change my thought process on that. And that I used to be you know what, that's not, I'm just here to support my friend, and
he's a grown ass man.
Yeah. Or they're grown and they can take care of themselves and they can make decisions for themselves. But I think I've come around to the point where I'm just you know what, if my friend or is in a toxic relationship, because I've been in toxic relationships.
Mm-hmm. We all have.
And when you're in it, it is hard to know that you're in it. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to recognize this is not good. Maybe you it takes a long time, or at least from my experience, it takes a long time for those toxic relationships to end. And a lot of times, if maybe a friend, I don't know how much a friend saying something would have curved my behavior and made me think I need to get out of this sooner. Mm-hmm. But I do think that if a friend had voiced, and maybe they did and I just didn't listen.
Let's phone these friends. Stay tuned for our heartbreak episode 2020.
If a friend had voiced some hey, I'm worried about you. I don't think this is a good relationship for you to be in. Mm-hmm. And those exact words were never said to me. But
yeah, I can definitely see some of your friends maybe trying to drop some hints.
Mm-hmm.
but they wouldn't have used those words.
Yes.
And so granted, I wasn't involved at the time when these toxic relationships took place, so I can't say for certain, but knowing your friends, I find it, I mean, I could imagine that maybe no one said anything, but I could also imagine that there were some gentle nudges or gentle, like, comments or something like, you know, something bad happened and you're upset, you're playing video games and just being like, oh, just let her leave, or, you know, just like little snippets like that. Yes. I could see that definitely being there, but I agree with you completely. And when you're in one of those relationships, those types of things, you're so consumed, they just go right over your head, do you know what I mean, and barely hear them. And I also think you make a good point about, even if they had said something, how useful would that be? Because I know for a fact, so my best friend Jen laughs all the time because she always tells me when my relationships are over, like 3 to 6 months in advance, and she, you know, calls it every time, and she's just very straightforward about it. And there's been numerous times where she would have a very similar conversation, and I know I was finally getting more mature because I actually started listening.
Oh,
right?
Really?
Like at the time we were having the conversation, I would just be making excuses, and a lot of these are high school relationships. I wouldn't define them as toxic, right? Until some of the other later ones, but it was very much like, Hattie, why are you still with him? This is over. Like, I know you well enough to know that this is not
something.
And you're unhappy, and what's going on here, you know? And you know, I'm just coming up with all these excuses. So I'm sitting and listening to what she has to say, but emotionally and in my logic, I'm not accepting it.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And then later on, as I moved through college and after college, we'd have more of these discussions, and that I feel like I would actually listen. You know, I do feel like there was a distinct transition at some point. I don't know when or how it happened, but it was like, she is right. I do deserve better. Oh. You know, or like,
way to go,
Jen. I know, but I mean, we've been friends for like 15, 18 years, like a long time. Well, and she has enough evidence, because all through high school she'd be like, I told you, like when we finally would break up. Yeah. Like, that's the joke she makes. She's like, I've been telling you. And so it'd be like the third or fourth one, she'd be like, do you not see a trend? Yeah. So
just listen to me. Yes. I know best.
Yes. So it's not like she doesn't have the proof to back it up. And I am logical enough to see in hindsight. Yeah. Once I've broken up with the person, Jen did have a conversation with me. Like,
well, it's funny that like you talk
that's
about
happened multiple times.
Well, it's funny just talking about like a friend like giving their like advice, and like, so it took a number of years, first of all, for the friend to be comfortable in giving that advice.
Right. I definitely feel that I didn't receive any messages like that from any other friend.
Yes.
So it was very much, this is my best friend, aka my sister, that is coming to me in dire straits, right? It's not like, oh, they're kind of fighting. Like, it's like she knows things are over, right? Mm. So it's extreme, and she's already at that highest regard level of closeness of a relationship. Whereas I don't believe that anyone else, if you were in any other, even if you're just a tiny step down, I feel like that's too far of a step, and no one would have
listened to you.
Yeah, or like said something to me, or felt like they could or should.
Yeah, I think it's been, so there's been probably 2 people in my life that, outside of family members, because I do think that like, I do have some family members that I am able to, like, I would tell them, you're in a toxic relationship, knowing good well that they're probably not going to listen to me.
But you feel like you're doing your due diligence.
And like, I do feel like, because I've grown up with them, or like, we've been family since we were younger, so I do feel like I can tell them, hey, like, because of that time we spent together, I can honestly tell them, like, how I feel about the relationship. Now, I wouldn't say that I do that very often, because a lot of times it can be a polarizing topic. Right. But I do feel
like that's yes. Like, Jen was always absolutely certain that there was nothing she could say that would make it like end our friendship.
Yes.
But that's the point. You have to be extremely high on that friendship relationship to have that confidence, right? That nothing is going to end our friendship. Right.
And I've only had, like I said, I've only had two friends that I felt like I could be comfortable enough to be like, hey, like, this is not working out. I've seen past relationships of yours. Like, I know who you are as a person. And I have a pretty good idea of who, like, this person that you're dealing with. And, like, either they're taking advantage of you or, like, you guys are just, like, you're hanging on here by threads.
Right.
And
just let it go.
Yeah. So, and it's, like, I feel like now, I do that more readily in terms of telling my friends that they're in toxic relationships, which I would say at this point in my life,
it's not me.
It's not me. But I do not all of them. And I do feel like, hey, I can, because I care for you, because like you are such a close friend of mine, I can tell you that like I'm concerned about the situation, and like I like Jen, like she had Jen had evidence before of previous relationships, and how those didn't work out, that like was able to support why she could go and say something to you, right? So like I feel like at least with my friends, or that I'll be comfortable enough to say, hey, this is not a good idea, or what are you doing here? I have had enough evidence based on previous relationships, previous times when they're happy, and their behaviors, and what they're doing, to know, hey, like this is this working for you? Are you happy in this relationship? So I think ultimately, like whenever you see a friend or somebody in a relationship, you want them to be happy. And if you don't see that, you want to try to get them to a happy place.
Right. I agree.
Yeah, and it's funny thinking about like.
So, sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, we haven't even defined a toxic relationship. Which may be best. Let it up to the viewer to decide what it means to them. But I think it might be insightful for us to kind of talk through what qualifies a relationship as toxic. Because I do think that in relationships, there are phases. And especially as the relationship goes on longer, I don't think it's reasonable to expect that it's always going to be smooth sailing. Like, I guess what I'm trying to say is I feel that even a successful, good, loving, wonderful relationship is going to have rocky times that may last longer than we fought tonight, right? Like there may be a period of time where things are not good, but overall, I wouldn't classify that relationship as toxic. Do you know what I mean? So I think there's something to be said for when is it just a rough patch versus this has crossed the line into toxicity, if that makes sense. So I think that would be kind of interesting to talk through and think that you look like you're deep in thought. Yeah,
I'm thinking about this question, and I think...
Because I think it's really hard to answer. Because
yes, it is.
To be honest, we had a pre-discussion a couple weeks ago about this podcast topic, and I brought up the same question then, and we both just kind of had our raw thoughts coming out. But I don't... Maybe I have a different opinion than you, but I don't feel like we really came to a distinct, oh yeah, that's clearly the definition.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I think we both just kind of had a lot of thoughts that we blurted out into the universe, but not a lot of kind of resolution or like decision.
Yeah, I would say the number one thing for me in a toxic relationship is when you can't find anybody that says, like, you can't ask a friend, like, what do you think of our relationship? And that friend would give you the feedback, oh, like, sounds like you guys are happy and in a good place, right? So if you're, like, afraid to ask your friends, like, hey, like, what do you think of my relationship? Or, like, if your friends are, like, maybe scared to give you the truth. Or if you can't find a friend to say, hey, like, you guys are good together, right? So I think that is the number one sign of, like, a toxic relationship. And that, like, nobody can confirm to you that, like, this is a good situation.
Right. That's an interesting way to put it. I didn't think about that.
Because I do think that, like, we always put this out there. Oh, such and such is just jealous of my relationship. Like, I don't think there are that many. Like, maybe there are some people that are, like, jealous, but people that care, like, the one or two people that you're gonna ask, like, hey, like, what do you think about my relationship? Or, like, I don't think those one or two people are truly jealous of, like, what you have.
Right.
And a lot of times I think people create this idea of, oh, they're just jealous, like, of what I have.
Because it's something they don't want to hear.
Yeah. Well, they're just jealous because, it's something that they don't want to hear, but it's also something that, like, it creates the reason why, like, oh, if they're jealous, then they're not going to tell me the truth.
Yeah. Right. It automatically discredits whatever they have to say. Yeah, I agree. And I was thinking more along the lines, so I really like that because it's kind of a symptom that's an indicator, and there's not really a false negative in that, right? Like, if you have the scenario you just described, it's not a good relationship. Like, there's no time in which you have the scenario you described and 6 months later the couple are out of it and doing great. You know what I mean? It's like 100% accuracy. Like, it always suggests. Yeah, like. Do you know what I mean? So I think that was a really good observation. I was kind of thinking more along the lines of how the two people treat each other. Mm-hmm. And I think that... So first I want to clarify, I think that abusive relationships are toxic, but not all toxic relationships are abusive. And I think we were more talking about toxic relationships, not necessarily ones that are also actually abusive relationships. But I think that... So I'm not trying to delve into that.
I think we need to, like, clarify. So I think, like, when you say abuse, what do you mean by abuse?
So that could mean physical or emotional abuse. But I think that you can have a toxic relationship that has toxic emotional behaviors, but it's not necessarily emotional abuse. Like, I think it's on a continuum, and it's trending that direction, but it's not anything criminal, right? Or, like, cross the line.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make that clear, but I think that...
And I would make the point that, like, any, like, physical abuse is already toxic.
Way too far.
Yeah, that's already a toxic, like,
here's the line and it's way over.
Yeah. And I would say that, like, any type of emotional abuse, but I feel like, for me at least, it's hard to, like, put a finger on exactly, like, what is emotional abuse, right? Because in theory, I would like to say, yes, there's this one little point that, like, is emotional abuse. But for, like, some people, like, saying some things might not be emotional abuse, right?
Well, and I think it has to do with two things. First of all, I think it has to do with the pattern of behavior over time, and the severity of the behavior. But I also think it's one of those things that's in the eye of the beholder.
Yes.
And I'm not trying to, like, bring up more things about consent or whatever, but I feel like there's a lot of scenarios in which maybe in the consent issue, one person feels they have consent and the other person feels they do not have consent, right? And so I think that, kind of like you said, there's no hard line. It's kind of very blurry, and I think that depends on... One person may think that, we're just fighting and we're not that respectful towards each other, but this is just how I conduct my life. And with past partners, that was fine. But with a new partner, suddenly in that person's perspective, this is not okay, and this is abusive. So I think that's partly why I kind of wanted to talk about it, because there is that blurred line and there is that continuum. So I just wanted to make clear, for this purposes of this podcast, is we're not necessarily talking about things that we would classify as abusive. I don't want anyone to think that that's what we're discussing or anything like that. But, so going to my definition, I think that for me what signifies a toxic relationship is when the two people have a lack of basic respect for one another, and that's demonstrated through their actions. So there might be times when the couple is having a great time and things are going great and they're being nice to each other, but it's not really because they truly respect and care about that person. It's because, like, conveniently for them, do you know what I mean? Like, whereas it'd be so easy for them to slide into another day into behavior that's extremely disrespectful, right? And so I feel like if you truly have that level of respect, it's not a light switch flipping on and off between these types of behaviors.
Mm-hmm. So when you say, like, respect, can you give, like, an example of what, like, you have respect for, like, your partner, and, like, and what, like, not having respect for your partner would look like?
That's a great question. And I think it's, again, kind of goes back to a pattern, right? Because I can say that in an argument or in a fight, there might be an instance where two partners who I would say respect and love each other don't listen or talk over the other or are yelling even, you know, like things that are not fun or pleasant to be around. But when you just asked me that question, the first thing that popped into my head is, oh, someone that never listens to the other partner and constantly dismisses them, right? But then I start to think, well, when you get in a heated fight, maybe you kind of slide into that, right?
But it's not a pattern, right?
It's not a pattern, right. Or, you know, maybe someone is constantly thinking only of themselves and not considering the other person whatsoever at all. To me, that can happen if someone is really stressed at work. You know what I mean? Like, a respectful, loving person can slide into that behavior when there's high stress or other things going on for maybe a short period of time. And maybe that, you know, they realize and they apologize or they try to do better, but I would say someone that's disrespectful just consistently acts that way. Yeah. And even when it's brought up, doesn't really care to change. Or maybe they might say they do, and in the moment,
maybe it
like,
changes for like a month.
Day. But they lack that, again, that pattern. They lack putting it into practice and making a consistent effort. Yeah. So, yeah, I think it's really hard to define.
Yeah, and I can think of a couple examples of, like, someone being in a toxic relationship. And, like, my examples are, like, say two people are out and the other one is, like, one partner is blatantly, like, hitting on another person in front of them. Right. And it's, like, it is not, like, hey, like, just talking. It is blatantly obvious to everyone there.
In the room. Right.
Yes.
That and I would classify that as extremely disrespectful.
Yes. And I think that, like, say, like, this is an example of when I was in, like, a toxic relationship. Like, literally, like, or this is, so two people say they, like, go, like, out, and the other person just, like, leaves them with no word, no communication about, like, where they are or, like, what they're doing. They just up and bounce, like, oh, like, I'll see you when I see you. And so I think that is, like, signs of not only disrespect, but just, like, signs of a toxic relationship. And like we were saying earlier, it's really hard to, like, combat and, like, realize those signs when you're in the relationship.
Or maybe part of you kind of does, but you don't want to admit it to yourself. You know, like, yes. I feel like there's... Anytime my friends have been in a toxic relationship or I've been in a toxic relationship, I feel like there's some acknowledgement that things are not right, but it's like not enough weight is given to that or excuses are made, right? Because there is still some good like there's something keeping you in the relationship, right?
Yes.
And so...
And a lot of times that's just convenience.
Yeah, and, like, you might acknowledge that this isn't great. But it's like, but there's all this other stuff. So I feel that it's maybe less of acknowledging this is bad and more acknowledging it's as bad as it is.
Yeah. And I think, like, I'm speaking personally for myself. Like, every time, like, the relationship has gotten to a toxic place, like, I knew that I should have broken up with that person. I knew that this was not like a long term like situation. And a lot of times like there was an attempt to break up with the other person.
And then you told me about this before, how you
always
take him back.
I am the world's
they talk
worst
you
person.
into it.
Yeah, I am the worst person at breaking up with somebody. Like this is a running joke. Like I am bad at breaking up with people. And so
I don't know if I should feel secure or concerned.
Feel secure.
I'm teasing.
Just the relationship won't end until you're ready for it. So I usually like.
Well, the running joke for me is that I don't get broken up with. That's not true. I've been broken up with one time, but then I got back with them.
Yeah.
So
like, I knew I knew that the relationship was over. I knew there was no chance of.
And you knew it to the point of trying to cut it off previously.
Yes, and like as a result of me not being able to like be brave enough and be courageous enough to like break up with somebody, then like I in a shame and looking back on it so bad, like I relied on being toxic as I'm gonna make this really, really toxic and hopefully they'll like
I think that
break up. Like hopefully they will understand that this isn't working and they like will end the relationship.
I think that's a really interesting and I'm blanking on the word, I guess insightful point that you're making. Because I think that's what happens, right? In a lot of relationships, I don't necessarily think sometimes it may be a conscious choice. I'm going to make this a living hell and they finally get rid of me. But I think a lot of times it's subconscious, right? The person knows inside, I don't like this or I don't want to be with them. And so they lose any incentive they have to be nice and respectful, right? And things are not working and they're unhappy and they're miserable and it manifests itself in this disrespectful pattern of behavior type of way. I definitely believe that, and I think that was just really insightful, and I think you make a great point too about being brave, because it's really scary to break up with someone,
it's hard
nobody
to do.
likes it, and I feel like that's why it always takes me so long. It's because it's something I dread. I don't want to do it, and I'm avoiding it. I haven't worked up the courage to do it yet, and I think I feel like a lot of people, get caught up in, I don't want the other person to be sad. And I think there's a lot of this relationship is great in these aspects. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's not as bad as I think. Or what if I don't find anything as good?
Or maybe we can do better. Like, maybe things will get better. Like,
right, exactly.
Is not, like, maybe I can change said person or change this behavior.
Right.
And it'll make it better for us. Like.
Mm-hmm. But I think at some point, it just like you said, it can be convenience or whatever you're used to. And you just fall back into that.
The trap.
That trap, yeah. And so I think you said it really well. Like, you really need to work up the courage to do it.
Yeah.
So tell us about when you finally realized a relationship was toxic. What was how did that realization come about?
Well, I don't honestly, it wasn't until this podcast topic that I thought about some of the toxic relationships that I've been in.
But so that's my point though, is we have this topic of toxic relationships and you thought about the two you've been in. So already you had identified in your mind those two were toxic. Mm-hmm. Right? It's some time before this podcast came to be. So my question is, when did you realize that and what caused that realization? Maybe it was while you're still in the relationship. Maybe it was 4 years later. So that's just what I'm asking.
And so, and I think my answer's still the same.
So you would say up until you thought about this topic, you didn't think you had been in any toxic relationships?
I didn't label them as
toxic. Interesting. Okay.
And I would like to think that there were some good times in there.
Of course, otherwise you wouldn't have been in a relationship.
And as I said before, I feel like I tried to break the relationship off before like it got to a toxic place.
Mm-hmm.
And so in a lot of ways, like maybe subconsciously I blocked out all the like toxic issues.
Mm-hmm.
Or not blocked them out, but like oh well, that was the end. Like it wasn't like that wasn't the majority of our relationship.
I feel like you and I are very similar. We always look back with rose-colored glasses, you know, and everything's always great, you know. You think about it, and then you start thinking about it, you're like, well, wait a second.
We had some dark times.
Towards the end, I was kind of like, well, that was kind of a lot of it, not just the end, you know. But like your first initial thought, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Is, well, I had all this great stuff with this, you know, I think that's really common to focus on the good and remember the good. But yeah, so that's interesting that you didn't really label it as such.
Yeah.
And I think too, in the toxic relationships I've been in, I definitely feel that part of it, even though I would say, I don't think that I was like the toxic one, but I don't think that all of my actions were not toxic. Do you know what I mean? So I feel like there was only a couple relationships where, I don't know what I'm trying to say. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's really hard in a toxic relationship for it to be concentrated solely on one person. Like there might be an aggressor or there might be someone that kind of starts it, but otherwise, these things happen over a short period to build up that pattern, and that the receiver is like, peace, I'm out of here, right? So for the toxic relationship to continue, that person has to continue being in it. Mm-hmm. And I find it very uncommon for that person to just be receiving all of it over and over and not giving it, you know what I mean? And I think there is something to be said. Like, I'm in no way am I trying to victim blame here. I'm not trying to be like, well, they're contributing to it or asking for it. That's not at all what I'm saying. I'm just saying that usually in these toxic type of relationships, both parties have stuff that they don't want to end, but both parties deep down realize maybe this isn't quite right. And contribute to the toxicity. And you know what I mean? Like, I don't think it's... Because I think, just what I said before, if purely it was all driven from one side and the other person wasn't adding to the toxicity or anything, they would just leave.
Well, I don't think that,
I don't stand to be treated this way and we're done here, you know?
Like, I don't think that, like, I would push back on that. I do think that, like, or it's been my observation in situations that the majority of the toxicity in a relationship is, like, I would say it's probably like 80 to 85% is on one party, like the aggressor. And then in most cases, like, that 15% is just like in response to the 85% to that aggressor.
And okay, so I agree with that. I definitely don't think it's like 50-50 split or 60-40. Yeah. I would say it's more close to what you're saying. But my point was that it's not like one person is entirely... Like, it's not that both parties are innocent, right?
Sure.
There have been times where I did things that I'm like, looking back, I'm like, that is not good at all, you know? Yeah. And I'm sorry about that, you know? Like,
yeah. And I get what you're saying, but I do think that there is an aggressor and there's one
a receiver,
person.
Yes.
And that person is...
I fully agree with that there's an aggressor and there's a receiver, yeah.
And so I think in kind of bringing this to a close, I hope that, like, if you... First of all, like, hopefully you have people that you can talk to and ask about, like, your relationships, right? We are all better when we have people that, like, we can count on and talk to and be, like, open and honest with. And be like, hey, like, what do you think about, like, what's going on in my relationship? Like, how do you think we are, like, around you? What is your perspective of, like, our relationship? So hopefully you have people that you can talk to about like your relationship, and hopefully you like those people that you talk to. They feel brave enough and secure enough in your relationship that they can be honest with you and tell you how like they feel and give you like honest feedback on what's going on and what they see or what they perceive.
I think that's a great point. So, for example, my brother Rob, before he proposed to my sister-in-law Sarah, he called everybody in our family, each individually one-on-one, and was like, things are getting really serious with Sarah, and it's really important to me to know your opinion. I would love any feedback that you have. What are your thoughts? Like, yada, yada. And it was one of those things where I could tell that he was very serious about not just wanting to know, oh, yeah, I think she's great, you know, but he was really in earnest trying to get our honest opinion. And so then it was easy to tell him, right? And I also felt that he was going to take what I had to say seriously.
Yeah.
Sure, I love Sarah, so it wasn't like I was going to say anything against it because that's what my honest opinion was. Yeah. But I felt very much that if my honest opinion had been something so great, he could have listened. He could have, you know, he might end up disagreeing with me or whatever, but he would at least have listened. Whereas he could have called and been like, I'm about to propose, so speak now or forever hold your peace. You know, and that just doesn't create, you know, despite our close relationship, it doesn't create that type of, okay, this is a sincere and serious conversation. And I think that, so my point with that is I think when you're the person asking for this, you need to set the tone to help that other person feel comfortable and feel secure in telling you this, right? And I think similarly, if you're the friend that might be giving the feedback or might be noticing something's wrong and wanting to say something, I think the way you phrased it earlier in the episode was awesome, of being like, I'm really concerned or I'm really worried about this, as opposed to saying, this person isn't right for you, why don't you just break up with them? Like, he's doing all this to you, you're doing all this to him, like, what is wrong with you? You know, which is, I feel like, because toxic relationships are this pattern, I feel like when friends or other family members work up the courage to finally say something, it's like they've said little things, like, I'm worried that you don't seem that happy, you know, and then finally when they have a conversation that's undeniably this conversation, it very quickly delves into, well, what are you doing? This doesn't make, you know, and it's more of a judgment conversation as opposed to, I'm worried about you and I'm trying to help you conversation. So I think that setting the tone is really important, both when you're soliciting people's honest opinions and when you're trying to give your honest opinion and showing that you're coming from a place of love and concern and not a place of, I'm judging you, what are you doing with your life? Yeah. So I like the way that you phrased that.
I'll try. All right. Anything else you want to add for the betterment of the group?
I don't think so, but if someone comes to you and is really worried, at least it took them some courage to work, you know, to come talk to you. So at the very least, try to keep your cool and listen to what they have to say, even if you don't agree or don't want to agree.
Yeah. And it's hard to know it when you're in it.
Yeah. So we've all been there. So
hopefully this podcast stops you from being in it.
Yep. Well, that's what we've been up to this month, and
see you next month.
See you next time.
Deuces.
I knew you were going to say deuces.